This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. Why not check out Apocalypse World War I, drawing from over 300 hours of archival footage? Apocalypse World War I traces the journeys of civilians and soldiers who fought for survival in one of the darkest times in history. It examines an era that fundamentally changed the worldwide balance of power from the war's outbreak in 1914 through the duration to the US intervention and the Treaty of Versailles. CuriosityStream is available on many platforms. There's a web app, Roku, Android, Xbox One, Smart TV, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle. Look, if you've got a screen, you can watch it, most likely. It's also available worldwide. So go to curiositystream.com/geographics for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. And right now, for you guys, you can use the promo code GEOGRAPHICS to get 25% off the cost of an annual membership, which comes out to just $14.99 a year, which, I don't know, some streaming services, I swear I pay that much every month, and that's for a whole year. Again, curiositystream.com/geographics, 25% off, $14.99 for the whole year. And now, today's video. It was on the 6th day of the 6th month of the 66th year of the 15th century AD that devout citizens of Florence were shaken by the fiery sermon of the Franciscan friar Michele Carcano preaching in the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. The friar thundered from his pulpit about the calamities which had scourged the Italian lands, the raids of the Turks, an unknown plague, torrential rains, and famine. He warned his congregation that these were all signs of a divine judgment, which was to come any day. The omen was clear, an alignment of Jupiter and Mars, which had happened only twice before, when Moses had received the divine law on Mount Sinai and when Jesus Christ had become incarnate in the Virgin Mary. Florentines, as well as inhabitants of most of Europe, China, and the Aztec Empire, had indeed been living and dying through decades of unpredictable weather patterns, endless winters, and failing crops. The Judgment Day, obviously, did not arrive, but easy times, these certainly were not. Jupiter and Mars, though, were not to blame. Rather an earthier cataclysm, a still mysterious, gigantic volcanic event taking place somewhere in the Pacific. This is the story of the mystery eruption of the 15th century. On many occasions around the midpoint of the 15th century, inhabitants of our wondrous planet observed signs and portents never observed before. On the 14th of September 1465, Milanese noblewoman Ippolita Maria Sforza entered the city of Naples with her entourage to marry King Alfonso. Every bride-to-be knows that she must bring to her wedding something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Ippolita really outdid herself, as local chroniclers reported that on that day the sun turned blue. From noon until the evening, the sun was of blue color and hardly shone within fog and haze. And this endured for 10 days, accompanied by silence and calm of the air without any breeze. Similar phenomena were recorded in Germany around the same date. In the Westphalian town of Soest, the sun in the sky was so blue and the air so yellow that nobody knew what that might be. The sun's ring and its light were blue, and for some time red and white, while the sun over Constance, southern Germany, sometimes changed colors, yellow, then red, surrounded by circles like a rainbow. Sightings of similar anomalies predated the late summer of 1465. In 1464, a chronicler from the island of Imbros in the Aegean noted unusual signs in the sky. The midday sun took the color of dark copper, as if covered by a dense, gloomy cloud. Aztec sources from the same year describe how it rained summer fires which destroyed old trees and prevented farmers from sowing. Thousands of miles away, a mysterious fog fell over Beijing, while central and southeastern China were scourged by a rain of black rice falling from the sky. Elsewhere in the world, worried citizens, and especially farmers, took notice of a strange, persistent, hovering fog. It blocked the light and heat from the sun, blue or otherwise, causing unpredictable weather patterns and harvest failures. To modernize, this global-level event shares eerie similarities with the year without a summer of 1816, which followed the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. Now, we've already got a video on that cataclysmic chain of events, so we'll not go into details here. If you want to learn more, well, you can watch that video. What matters to us is that something similar happened 4 centuries earlier. But who or what was the culprit? Research into the elusive eruption of the 1400s began with a series of archaeological expeditions in the South Pacific in the 1950s. Researchers visiting the islands of Tonga and Vanuatu collected stories about a now disappeared landmass, which linked it to the nearby Epi. This land was known as Kauai, and it was the home of a giant volcano. According to local lore, an inhabitant of Kauai was tricked into sleeping with his own mother. Understandably, he flew into a supernatural rage of such proportions to cause an eruption. Now, Oedipal legends aside, the story perpetuated the memory of a series of earthquakes topped by a volcanic event which destroyed Kauai, causing it to sink into the ocean. From then on, Epi and Tonga became two separate islands. The survivors of the explosions fled by boat to the nearby islands, only to die later of unknown causes. The last living Kauaian, a young man called T. Tongoa Lisaki, settled in Tonga and passed the story down the generations for centuries onwards. As is often the case with legends and folklore, researchers suspected there was a kernel of truth to the story of the young Tongoan. To begin with, half a mile deep beneath the ocean, halfway between Epi and Tonga, there is in fact a caldera or underwater crater. The next step was to ascertain if and when a cataclysm of such magnitude had actually happened. Fast forward to the 1980s, and geological expeditions investigating polar ice cores found spikes in acidity dating back to the 15th century. Analysis of ice core acidity is a common method used to study ancient volcanic eruptions, as these tend to disperse enormous quantities of sulfuric acid into the atmosphere. Sediment and emissions from eruptions later resettle at ground level, later to be covered by layer upon layer of polar ice. The comparative analysis of these layers can help identify the date and even magnitude of the explosion. This is how researchers estimated that the 15th century blast may have been more violent than the Tambora event, an eruption which unleashed destructive energy equivalent to 2.2 million atomic bombs. So, we have the what, an alleged eruption in Kauai. Then we have the when, a previously unknown volcano going off in the 15th century. Another archaeological expedition uncovered the alleged remains of T. Tongoa Lisaki, the survivor. By using carbon dating technology, they found that he must have died sometime between the 14th and 15th century. It would be easy to jump to conclusions then. In the 1400s, a volcano exploded in the South Pacific, destroying Kauai. The gas and ashes spewed into the atmosphere, creating a permanent fog or haze which affects most of the globe. This haze blocks out the sun, giving it a blue or dark copper appearance. Somewhere else, ashes rain down on Earth, appearing as grains of black rice. More worryingly, the layer of volcanic emissions blocks most of the sun's heat, causing harvests to fail. But the scientific community is skeptical by nature. There were still too many question marks hanging in the air. What was the exact year of the event? Was Kauai really the guilty party? And did the mystery eruption actually even take place? In the early 1990s, a team of French geologists led by Professor Michel Monzier visited the Kauai caldera, and in May of 1993 they published their findings. They estimated that the eruption had released enough magma to fill up the Empire State Building 37 million times over, and the solid debris was shot 30 miles into the sky. The team also found remains of trees devastated by the eruption and put them through a radiocarbon test. According to their findings, the event took place between 1420 and 1430. But another researcher, publishing in December of the same year, did not agree. Dr. Kevin Pang of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory firmly dated the Kauai explosion to the year 1453. He reached this conclusion by piecing together a number of convincing clues, mostly related to unusual weather patterns and historical records of crop failures. For example, China was hit by copious snowfalls, lasting as long as 40 days. Contemporary chronicles state that the Yellow Sea froze up to 13 miles from the shore. As a result, tens of thousands of people died of frostbite and starvation. In Sweden, grain crops failed, leaving grain stores and bellies woefully empty. An even worse famine struck the Aztec Empire. Tree ring records show that the year 1454 was characterized by an extended drought. It's no coincidence that Aztec codices mention that year as one of the famine of one rabbit. According to the Aztec calendar, one rabbit is the first year of the recurring 52-year cycle, and according to folklore, this year always comes with a curse, resulting in catastrophe and famine. Pang found clues linking the Kauai explosion to another horseman of the apocalypse, war. On the 22nd of May, 1453, defenders of the Great Siege of Constantinople were astounded by the sight of a great fire raging in the sky, a divine sign of impending doom. Maybe a Turkish tactic. According to Pang, it was merely an optical illusion. It had been caused by the rays of the setting sun reflecting on the ashes spewed by Kuwait into the atmosphere. 10 years later, an expedition from Massey University in New Zealand shipped in. Environmental scientist Carolee Nemeth was specifically looking for signs of a cataclysmic blast capable of changing weather patterns worldwide. Well, Nemeth's findings were anticlimactic, to say the least. The team analysed the existing caldera and concluded that the original volcano must have been no more than 1,000 meters high. This was about a quarter of Tambora and too small to generate an eruptive column capable of global impact. Nemeth and team did find evidence of pyroclastic flows around the mid-1400s, but these did not match the scenario of one single massive blast. If anything, these flows told the story of a series of small, localized eruptions which may have happened mostly underwater. Again, no chance that Kuwait may have turned the sun blue in Naples or starved the farmers in Tenochtitlan. I expect these findings dampened the efforts of many Hollywood scriptwriters known for the accurate research poured into their historical fiction works. There it was, a fantastical story based on a loud bang, which turned out to be no more than a whiff. But despair not, for further studies produced a picture for rather more apocalyptic scenarios. Two independent research teams, led by Professor Christopher Plummer and Professor Jihong Koldai, delivered a double whammy of further evidence in 2012 and 2013. They analysed ice cores from a site in Antarctica known as Law Dome. Here they found confirmation of sulfur spikes occurring in the 15th century, therefore proving again that a cataclysmic explosion did happen. Furthermore, they provided another estimate for the year of the explosion, 1458. But don't fixate too much on that date, as it carries a margin of error plus or minus 7 years. Dr. Martin Borch from the University of Leipzig, in his 2017 paper, The Day the Sun Turned Blue, points out that Plummer and Koldai may have had their date slightly off. 1458 plus 7 takes us to 1465, the year in which the wedding of King Alfonso was made memorable by a bluer shade of sun. So what of the previous hypothesis by Dr. Pang and the fire in the sky observed at Constantinople? Borch dismissed this notion, stating that chroniclers may have exaggerated reports to confirm the fulfillment of ancient prophecies on the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Dr. Borch proceeded to compile a series of occurrences taking place in the 1460s and 1470s, leading him to suggest that the Kauai explosion took place in 1464 and had lasting consequences. So let's have a look at the evidence. We've already covered the blue sun of September 1465. Further sightings were reported by Heidelberg historian Matthias von Kamnat, who wrote that during the rule of Frederick I of the Palatinate, 1452 to 1475, quote, "The sun has been seen blue many times a day, and a cross was spotted in the moon, as well as many more miracles in the sky." Besides prodigious events, citizens of Europe had to contend with the consequences of climate change. In a few words, 1465 was the original year without a summer. This annus horribilis kicked off in January with heavy rainfalls causing the Arno River to flood Florence. In March and April, severe precipitation fell upon Murcia in the normally dry southeast of Spain. May in Ireland was abnormally frosty and snowy. Early summer in Italy and France was cool and rainy, which led to poor harvests of fruit and, most importantly, grain. This represented the staple diet for the majority of Europeans in the late medieval period. Spoiled crops of wheat, barley, and rye would cause shortages, inflation, and at the end of the chain, famine. The death of grain was indeed worryingly, according to contemporary sources, mostly Italian. A chronicler in Lombardy noted how grain prices had tripled between August 1464 and May 1465 due to scarcity, and that people could not afford bread anymore. The famine was compounded by a general economic crisis, which had reduced the earnings of craftsmen, traders, and merchants. An edict by the government of Bologna, dated 29th of July, bans grain exports, indicating that the city's food reserves were almost totally spent. Northern France suffered a different issue. There, the harvest was abundant, but the grain was largely mouldy due to inclement weather. The effects, therefore, were the same. The lack of summer also devastated one of Europe's key economic sectors, the production of wine. In autumn of 1465, a Zurich chronicler lamented that the grapes were so hard that vine workers shied away from gorging on them. Around the same time, casks of wine produced around Metz, Paris, and Thuringia were dumped en masse due to their sour quality. But the effects of the chilly weather did not abate at the end of summer. They continued for several months, even years. In the autumn of 65, lakes Zurich and Constance in Switzerland froze solid. The ice was so thick that people could dance on the lakes and even cross them with horses. Weeks, even months of snowfalls were suddenly interrupted by an apparent hike in temperatures. The resulting thawing caused another season of widespread flooding. Citizens of Florence barely had cleared the mud and snow from the previous months when the city was flooded again in January 1466. The same fate befell Marburg Castle in Poland, fortress of the Teutonic Order. The cellars overflowed with water, and I imagine those mighty knights had to ditch sword and shield to toil away with mop and bucket. Exactly 1 year later, the same pattern of rain followed, by melting snow inundating Yorkshire and presumably most of northern England. Freezing rain fell upon northern France for weeks without break in the spring of 1467. Later, on the 29th of September, Germans and Italians both observed an unusual comet, believing it was a messenger of further tragedy to come. They weren't wrong. Rain continued to pour down over those lands until the end of the year and well into 1468. Many German sources recorded how the autumn of 1468 was so wet that corpses started surfacing in the cemeteries due to the rising groundwater. Whilst barely any source records people dying directly of hunger, Europeans suffered greatly from a direct consequence of starvation: epidemic disease. In July, several clergymen in Glatz, modern-day Klodsko, Poland, were recorded as dying of an unknown pestilence. This may have been the same disease which the following month ravaged Switzerland and the Alsace region. In autumn, the disease, characterized by fever and chest pain, reached northern Italy. It seems like the epidemic subsided during the winter, only to reappear in May of 1466 in Metz, northern France. Here, church authorities imported a piece of the Holy Cross, which reached the city in August. Apparently it worked, and the plague abated, but not in Poland. There, the epidemic was so severe that no person was fit or alive enough to tend the fields. Cities, towns, and villages were left deserted. The unknown illness returned to northern Italy in early 1468. Desperate city authorities looking for answers to the scourge resorted to imprisoning doctors. To them, this was the only possible explanation. Medical professionals had been voluntarily poisoning citizens to steal their goods. The pestilence did not spare the Eternal City, or rather the countryside around Rome. Food growers were too ill to bring their produce to market, leaving Romans to die of hunger. By June, the epidemic had spread to Hamburg, Lübeck, and Cologne. In October, thousands of deaths were recorded in Stralsund on Germany's Baltic coast. The disease crossed the sea in 1469, landing in Sweden, where it stayed until 1471. Following a different path, the mysterious plague knocked on the door of the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople, Cyprus, and other areas endured wave after wave until 1472. Dr. Bell's research is currently the latest comprehensive inquiry on the mysterious eruption, and we personally find the evidence to be quite compelling. But the author himself notes that his findings are by no means conclusive. Unusual weather patterns and outbreaks of unidentified diseases took place earlier than 1464, his estimated date of the Quay explosion. For example, heavy snowfalls, out-of-season damaged crops, and disrupted travel as early as 1461. Devastating famines crippled livelihoods in Venice, England, and France in the first months of 1464. The pestilence had already emptied cities north and south of the Alps in 1461 before sweeping Germany in 1463. Understandably, the scientific community is not 100% convinced yet of what exactly happened and when. So allow me now to piece together all cited research into a single interpretation of events. It seems likely that the Kauai volcano was extraordinarily active from 1420 to 1465, with evidence of several eruptions. Some of these were not large enough to warrant worldwide effects, while at least one of them resulted in a climate-altering event of global proportions. Pinpointing the exact date may not be possible, not yet at least, but we could venture the hypothesis that the effects lasted for years, even decades, as the multitude of differing reports seem to suggest. In other words, if Tambora gave us the year without summer, Kauai was responsible for the years without a summer. But we're not an expert, and if you are, well, there's the comment section below. For our part, we can only conclude with the grim reflection that what we have learned from studying such events is how interconnected and fragile human society is, and how dependent it is on the sudden, violent whims of nature. Poet and philosopher Giacomo Leopardi lived in the shadow of the year without summer of 1816, and he best summarized this concept in his Dialogue Between Nature and an Icelander. In this short parable, an Icelander, whose life had been made miserable by the harshness of the elements and natural disasters, finally comes face to face with the personification of nature herself, appearing as a gigantic woman. As he laments his woes and asks the reasons for her hostility, nature states her indifference to the plight of man. Thinkest thou then that the world was made for thee? It is time thou knewest that in my designs, operations, and decrees, I never gave a thought to the happiness or unhappiness of man. If I cause you to suffer, I am unaware of the fact. What I do is in no sense done for your enjoyment or benefit, as you seem to think. If I, by chance, exterminated your species, I should not know it. So I really hope you found today's video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.